right, so I finally got the new setup in place. I'm pretty excited about it too. I really like the way that it looks. I'm hoping you'll be able to see an increase in video and lighting quality at home. This is being filmed on the Fuji X-T3. Haven't had a whole lot of time to really fuss around with it to figure out all the subtle nuances, but I ran a couple video tests and I'm really happy with the files coming out of the camera so far, but I know I can make it that much better, but I hope you're able to see an increase in video quality right now. And the new lighting is absolutely fantastic. I love the fact that I can increase and decrease the output of the light. I've never been able to do that before. My ring light was just an on-off switch and that was it. Plus having remote control is always a cool thing as well. So I hope you're able to see an increase in quality at home. After all, that's the overall the reason for the upgrade, and I hope it just makes it that much easier on your eyes. And that's also the purpose of this week's video. It's really to discuss, upgrading cameras, buying your first camera, buying new cameras or second bodies, and just that overall decisioning process. Because I just went through it and I was reminded about how difficult it actually can be. So if you're looking to get into photography, buy your first camera, or you're looking to upgrade your current camera or get a second body like I did, I'm hoping you'll be able to get some useful information out of this video that'll help you out with your buying decision moving forward. Because there's so many options out there, from the many brands, from Fuji, Nikon, Canon, Sony, Lumix, Panasonic, to the different sensor sizes, full frame, APS-C, micro four thirds, and you have mirrorless, DSLR, and the list just goes on and on and on of the different choices you have to make. And it can be a little bit overwhelming. But when I was going through the process, I really narrowed it down to 8 questions that I ultimately asked myself. And I found it was very helpful for me to kind of stay on track to determine exactly, 1, do I really need to make an upgrade? And 2, which camera is going to be best for what I'm trying to do. So the first question that I asked myself was really, Mark, what problem are you trying to solve? What's broken that you're trying to fix? And the issue that I was having is I was using my main stills camera, my Sony a7R II, also for video, which was fine. I did it for a couple years. There's really no big issue with that other than it was just a little bit of an inconvenience. But I started to do kind of on-location videos, and that's pretty hard to do with one camera. So I wanted to get a dedicated setup just for video that I could also use for landscape photography if I choose, and a dedicated lens just for that activity. So I have 2 completely separate systems. So that was really the pain that I was having. That was the issue I was trying to solve, is to get 2 separate setups, one for stills and one for video. But just asking yourself, what are you trying to fix? Now, if this is your first camera, this first question is null and void. You don't even have to ask yourself that. But if you're looking to get a second body or upgrade what you currently have, it's a good question to ask yourself is, what problem are you trying to solve? Now, the second question has to do with budget. And it's really important to set a budget in the beginning. Don't start shopping and then set a budget, which I've done before. But I set a budget for this purchase of, I think, $1,300 just for the camera body. And I knew I would go as high as $1,600 or $1,700. So I wanted to stay somewhere in that range. I knew $1,700 was going to be my absolute cap. And I'm happy to say that I got the Fuji X-T3. It was on sale, just the body, for $1,500. So I was smack dab in my budget range. I was pretty happy about that. But set that budget before you start shopping. That'll kind of keep you on track from overspending, because that's easy to do with photography. Now, the third question you want to ask yourself is, which route do you want to go? Do you want to go mirrorless, or do you want to go DSLR? There's benefits and pros and cons to both. DSLRs have great image quality, but they're bigger cameras, they're heavier, great battery life. You generally probably only have to carry around 1 battery, and that'll last you your entire shoot. Where mirrorless, once again, great image quality, smaller form factor, generally lighter cameras, horrible battery life. You're going to have to, the battery life is getting much better in mirrorless cameras, but they're still nowhere close to DSLRs. But you're going to end up having to carry multiple 4, 5, 6 batteries around for your mirrorless setup. So, and then there's a lot of pros and cons like that to both, but just identifying which route you want to go is something you want to go ahead and clear up in the beginning before you start the actual shopping process. Now, the fourth question you want to ask yourself is, what sensor size do you want to go for? You want to go full frame? You want to go crop, APS-C? Do you want to go micro four thirds? And your budget is probably going to dictate where you land here. Full frame is definitely going to be the most expensive sensor size to go for. But you really want to ask yourself, what's the purpose of this camera? What are you going to be doing with it? So if you're going to be doing a lot of astrophotography and shooting the night sky, you probably going to try and figure out a way to get into a full frame camera. A full frame sensor is going to enable you to collect as much light, much ambient light as possible when you're shooting any kind of a situation, when in a dimly lit situation like astrophotography or any kind of night sky photography like that. So you want to be able to collect as much light as possible. So a full frame sensor in that situation is pretty critical. But for me, this camera, I knew, this new purchase, I knew I would never use it for any kind of astrophotography. One, I don't do a lot of astrophotography. And if I was going to, I would use this, my Sony a7R II for that. And most of the time, my new purchase is probably going to be used for video and some landscapes, some stills work. But I just really didn't need to have a full frame camera. Plus, my budget really didn't allow for it. Full frame cameras were definitely starting to come down, but it was going to put me over my budget. So I ended up going with a crop sensor. I know I didn't want to go all the way down to a micro four thirds. So I went with an APS-C sensor. And then once I had that determined, I knew I had a problem a legitimate problem that I needed to solve. I knew what my budget was. I knew I wanted to go mirrorless, and I knew what sensor size I wanted to go for, APS-C crop. Then I could actually start the research process. The next question is has to do with the image quality. And this is where the actual research comes into. You're able to narrow down the segment of the market that you want to go for. And now you can actually start to do your research to determine image quality. What camera has the best image quality? And for me, and this might vary from person to person, but I feel like there's three parts of image quality. The first, of course, is megapixels. Everybody wants a camera with a ton of megapixels. But in all honesty, unless you're printing huge images, pretty much any camera out there is going to have enough megapixels for you, especially if all you're going to do is just put images on the internet or share them on social media. Pretty much any kind of a DSLR out there today, or even point and shoots really, are all going to have somewhere in the low to mid 20 megapixel range. And that's really going to be plenty, especially if you're just printing, your standard size prints. Now, if you want to start printing big, yeah, you might want to look into the full frame cameras that have the really high megapixel counts like the D850 or the A7R series. But for the most part, pretty much any camera out there is going to have somewhere in that mid 20 range, and it's going to be just fine for whatever you're trying to do, unless you're just trying to print really big. But the megapixels is something you want to keep in the back of your mind as well, because you don't want something that's going to be have too few megapixels, which you're not going to run into that situation anyway, because any new camera out there today is going to have enough. So, and then the second part of this has to do with dynamic range. And dynamic range has to do with the tonality of an image. So the difference between the brightest brights and the darkest darks, basically pure white and pure black in an image. And just to kind of give you some frame of reference, the human eye can detect 20 stops of dynamic range. That's how dynamic range is measured in stops. And I think the best cameras on the market today, from a dynamic range perspective, are the Nikon D850 and the Sony a7R Mark III. Both of those cameras have right at about, I think, 15 stops of dynamic range. So, and that's pretty amazing, but that just kind of gives you a frame of reference. Your eye's got 20. The best cameras out there today are right about 15. And the average DSLR that you're going to find out there, you're somewhere in the 12, 13 range. So maybe 14 stops of dynamic range. So really, whichever route you go, you're going to have a good amount of dynamic range without having to get real grainy images when you try and increase your shadows when you're editing your images. Now, the third component of this, of image quality, has to do with ISO. Now, once again, you want to ask yourself, what are you going to do with the camera? If you're shooting a lot of night sky stuff, you might want to, wait, or you might want to look for a camera that has an emphasis on controlling noise. So a camera that does better at high ISO levels, because of shooting night sky, you're obviously going to be cranking up your ISO. But for me, for landscape photography, daylight landscape photography, sometimes I am shooting in you know, muted light situations in the blue hour before the sun rises or the blue hour after the sun sets. But those aren't pitch black scenarios, and I very rarely have to crank up my ISO above 100 ever. If anything, I would just lengthen out my shutter speed. So ISO wasn't a big deal for me, and I got a couple interesting images right here. So this image right here was taken with a 11-year-old Canon Rebel XS, I think is what it's called. And then the image on the right here was taken with my Sony a7R II with a fantastic lens, the 16 to 35 G Master. And they're both at exact same settings, 1/1250th of a second, f8, ISO 1600. I had to stop at 1600 because the Canon didn't go above that. But if I just zoom in on, say, this tree right here, now sure, there's definitely, you can see a little bit more grain in the Canon, which is to be expected. This is a 10 or 11-year-old camera. And this is a Sony a7R Mark II, which is I think a 2-year-old camera. So the a7R II is a substantially cleaner image, but it is not that big a difference. And especially if you zoom out, you really can't see any difference. And my whole point in showing that, one, I just wanted to see it myself, but two, pretty much any ISO, most cameras today are going to do really good at ISO performance. So unless you're shooting astro work, you're probably going to be fine with any kind of a camera you get from ISO performance level. Now, the sixth question that you really want to ask yourself has to do with the overall lens ecosystem. And what I mean by that is you're not just investing in a camera, you're also investing in that camera's brand's glass too, the lenses they offer. Now sure, there's adapters for all different kinds of cameras out there, but I really try and keep native lenses with native bodies. So if you have if you really want to start using Canon L glass, you might want to look at Canon cameras. Or if you love Nikon or Sony lenses, you might want to look at those brands. I have always heard great things about Fuji glass. I was already in the Sony system. I really wanted to try something new. And I've always heard how fantastic Fuji lenses are. So I knew that that's the route I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go with a Fuji camera. So that was kind of an easy decision. But you definitely want to think about the lenses that you're going to be attaching to the camera that you're going to be purchasing as well. And then the seventh component of this has to do with video. Now I know that not everyone shoots video, but if you do plan on shooting any kind of video, you might want to just take a look at those specs. If you're not going to do a lot of video, it probably won't be a deal breaker. Most DSLRs out there today, and heck, even a couple point and shoots, shoot 4K now. So they're all going to produce fantastic video. But for me, that was really the main purpose of my new purchase was video. And the X-T3 shoots 4K 60 frames per second, so I could get 4K footage and really slow it down, which is fantastic. There's not many cameras out there that do that now. I can shoot in F-Log, and I can, which is great for color grading, and I can also shoot a 10-bit video. And I don't want to get too techie on this right now, but the features from a video perspective of the X-T3 were just absolutely tremendous. And that's really the main reason I went with the Fuji camera as well. And then the final component of this, the eighth question, has to do with just the overall user interface or user experience. So I've been using Sony cameras for quite a few years now, and I'm very used to them. But I do hear a common complaint that the menu system is kind of hard to deal with, or they're difficult to use. And I'm just so used to the camera, I don't find them difficult to use anymore. But there's nothing super exciting about using a Sony camera. But I always heard great things about the Fuji system. The dials on the top, how you can adjust the ISO on the top and the shutter speed, and then you have the aperture ring on the lens barrel. And it was just a very intuitive, natural process to use those types of cameras, and I was really intrigued by that. And I have to say, out of the first few days that I've been using the X-T3, the description of that has been spot on. It is so fun to use, and I can't wait to shoot more with it. But that's something you definitely want to keep in mind, is the overall just user interface, and plus, you know, how the camera feels in your hand. So you want to take that into account as well. Now, I know a lot of times we order these cameras online and you don't have the ability to go down to your store to feel these cameras out. So renting them is a great option. And I'll put a couple links in the description below of places that you can rent camera and lenses to test them out before you actually make your ultimate buying decision. You can rent these cameras and lenses for pretty cheap too. So it's a great route to go to really identify which type of a setup you want to go with. So those are really the 8 questions that helped me to land on the Fuji X-T3, and I'm hoping that that will help you out as well. Like I said, to kick this video off, if you're looking to get a brand new camera or upgrade your current camera or to get a second body, I'm hoping you'll be able to get some information out of those 8 questions that'll help you out moving forward. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the new setup. I'm excited to see how far I can take the overall quality of the videos on this channel moving forward. And as always, I appreciate you watching this week's video. Any questions that you have, please leave them in the comments section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up, definitely appreciate it. It helps the channel out. And I will see you all next week. Bye.